Welcome to the Strategic Leader Podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, Fee. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Gem. How are you?
I'm good. I've been busy, very busy.
Very busy. I've also been busy this week. It's been a busy one. I had the pleasure of talking to one of our listeners this week. Shout out to Jane if you're listening to this episode.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, which was really nice. Nice to meet you in person, digital person, obviously, but that was fun. But yeah, busy week. But don't we always say that? When you say to someone, how's your week been? Is there anybody out there that doesn't go, oh, it's been a busy one?
I honestly think that it's the answer that we always have because we are all very busy all of the time.
And is that something we should be addressing?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because I saw this thing on social media this morning, one of those helpful little graphics that you sometimes see flying around. And it was a pile of kind of stones and rocks of varying sizes on the left-hand side. And there was a jar with stones and rocks on the right-hand side. And it was talking about the fact that, we've got to adjust our way of approaching things, adjust our capacity. It made me think of those time management trainings that we've been to, where we get some really helpful tips about putting the big rocks in first and then going with the smaller ones because they sort of shuffle around, and then putting the sand in around it, and you can usually get loads more in than if you kind of do it the wrong way around.
It's a helpful way of thinking about things, right? It is
really helpful.
Thinking about it. Put the big things in first. I don't know how often we actually do it.
Well, yes, and that's a really good question first, isn't it? Is do we mindfully manage our time? But the other thing that it made me think of is I was looking at this graphic and I was thinking, well, there's absolutely no way that all of those stones would go in that jar. And then it made me think, well, maybe not all of those stones need to go in that jar.
The jar can't get any bigger, can it?
The jar can't get any bigger, realistically. I mean, if you work 3 days a week, maybe you can sort of legitimately ask yourself, could I do 4 or 5 days a week? But most of us have a set time that we have available to us and a whole bunch of things. And most of us have way too much of those bunch of things that could ever possibly fit into the jar that we have, which is our week. So I thought it'd be a really great topic for us to explore today, because I think we can be very busy, we can be very active, we can be doing lots of things that feel like we are making progress. But if we don't step back and actually look at the quality and value of each of those activities, not just in terms of the order in which we put the rocks into the jar and putting the sand in last, which is a legitimate approach, but also actually really thinking about which of these do I need to be focusing on, which of these rocks do I need to really focus on?
Because that does make the assumption, does it not, that ultimately we've got the right amount of material that needs to go in the jar.
Yeah.
If we fit
and it happens when you're going on holiday, doesn't it?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I am about to go on holiday. I'm heading off on holiday tonight. So next week is a write-off for me work-wise. And I have taken a bit of a different approach this week in terms of how I prepare for going on holiday. So rather than running around like a blue-ass fly, although I still reserve the right to do that because it's still a few hours before I leave, I've been thinking, what are the most important non-negotiable things that I absolutely have to do before I go on holiday, so that big picture thinking, big picture strategic thinking, so that my main clients are looked after, my business is planned and going forward, the big goals that I have for myself and my work and my course are all sort of in train, and everything else, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And that's kind of fine for me personally, because I work for myself. I'm my own boss. I've got a bit of autonomy over this kind of stuff, but we don't always have that. And so we do have to think really consciously. I'm a great believer, the expression, you are what you eat. And, I would love to be a carrot, but I am more of a I'm more of a cinnamon bun, really. If we think about you are what you, I am a human cinnamon bun. But I think we are what we pay attention to is
Yeah,
really the pertinent way of thinking about this. Where
yeah.
our attention goes, where our thinking goes, where our time goes, is where our value goes,
Mm,
and also how we're perceived by other people. So if my attention and my time goes on the sand, the emails, the this, the that, the little things,
mhm.
then that's where my attention goes. That's where my value is. If my attention and my time is actually spent on the most important things, then that's where my value is going to be given. So it's thinking strategically about our time and our priorities. It can be really, really useful to zoom out and think about, okay, well, what is the most important thing?
And almost getting ourselves into the habit of doing that regardless of an external non-negotiable factor, such as going on holiday, because I
Mhm.
recognize that as well. When you are planning to get yourself away, the week in the run up to it is usually even more hectic and busy because you're trying to cram all of that activity in before you go. But you do have to make some really quite fundamental decisions about
Mhm.
how many of those rocks and stones and sand really do go into that jar, because the jar is only the size that it is.
Mhm.
And if we can then apply some of that thinking, some of those approaches, some of that kind of discipline into the weeks that we don't necessarily have a holiday, look
Mhm.
at you, in next week, then we can step up our strategic game because we are intentionally and actively putting those activities into the right priority in our week and not just stumbling through them, or another week goes by and we still haven't thought about the things that we need to think about that don't have an immediate urgent need or an emergent
Yeah.
question to answer, but are still really important for us to put our attention to.
And that notion of, oh, I really need to think about that big thing, but I just haven't got round to it this week.
Mm,
How often do those big things get kicked down the
mm,
road?
mm,
Largely, I think, because we're at the beck and call of the here and now.
mm.
Firefighting obviously comes into this. We're all familiar with that idea, but also other people's priorities, other people's demands on us.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my pet peeves here, which I will just wave the flag for, is switching off your notifications on your laptop and your phone. If you are making any kind of attempt to be strategic in your thinking and how you spend your time, you have to get your notifications off, because if you have them on, you are constantly being hijacked or kidnapped by other people's priorities and other people's timelines. And you can't afford for that to happen. You have to be working to your own. So it's not really going to be possible for you to just forget to check your emails during the course of a working day. Of course, you will check them, but for you to decide when you're going to check them, you are the master of your own time. It is your most precious resource. So I guess as my in my absolute, I have to talk about this, get those notifications off and work to the time frame that you set for yourself. You're still gonna have meetings and stuff in, flipping hell, but if we have notifications in there as well, that's the other people's sand, right? Those notifications.
Mm,
It's other people's
totally.
sand that you're filling your day with. What's gonna be a useful way of framing this discussion?
The Eisenhower matrix. It's described as a time management tool, and it
Mm.
is a really good time management tool. But I think it actually does an awful lot more than simply organize your time, because it gives us the opportunity to really assess all of those rocks in that pile, the big ones, the little ones, the sand, and how we can organize that in order for the optimum amount of that to fit in the jar. That's its time management purpose. But because it is really forcing us to think about which of those rocks need to go in the jar, because it is giving us a real sense of which are the big rocks, which are the small rocks, which are the bits of sand, it is also really shifting our focus into a much more strategic lens. So it is saying to us, we need to think about whether this is even important enough to do at all, to attend to at all. So the Eisenhower matrix is a 2 by 2 classic. You go.
We should
You go
one day we're going to publish a book of all these 2x2s, aren't we?
2 by yes, let's just do a book on 2 by 2s.
Mm.
So going from bottom to top is how important it is. So
Mhm.
is it of importance or not? Is it sort of daily noise? Some of the admin things you might argue are important, but in the value that that activity brings, the more important ones go in the top 2 boxes, and the less important activities go in the bottom 2 boxes. And then left to right, left-hand side is really urgent stuff, and right-hand side is not urgent. So I suppose the first thing is that, and the reason it's called the Eisenhower matrix is that it was Eisenhower that allegedly coined this idea of urgent and important being actually 2 different ways of looking at things. Sometimes we mistake the urgent for the important because urgent feels important, but often
Yeah.
sometimes it isn't.
Yes, it's important. It's important in the moment, but it may
Yeah,
not actually be strictly
yeah,
important in the big picture.
yeah. So the top left box, I think, is a really good place to start because that's the urgent and important. The things that we have to do now that are high demand. It could be something to do with firefighting, a particular challenge in the business. It could be meeting somebody else's urgent demands that we see as kind of important to ourselves. Any kind of high impact work that needs a really quick turnaround would go into that top left box.
Can I also add something to go into that top left box? We've all got important things that get kicked down the road, and then those then become urgent, and particularly strategic things, particularly these big things that don't necessarily have a deadline of like next Thursday.
Mm.
Um,
So urgent and important are, I would suggest, it forms quite a big proportion of what we do typically on a day-to-day basis, but by no means necessarily the biggest proportion, because we've got an awful lot of unimportant activity or activity that might sit below the line for other reasons. So if we explore those next, because they're likely to be consuming our time,
mhm.
the urgent but not important tasks, they're bottom left. So let's say we have an immediate need from the business. It is important in the context of the business or that person in terms of their needs, but it may not be necessarily something that we need to be doing, especially if we're a team leader, but a leader we've got people in our team that may actually be able to do that task instead. So the bottom left box is more of a delegate box. This is lower impact work, maybe work that doesn't align to what you are there to deliver, but
Mhm.
that your entire team is there to deliver, but somebody else can do that task rather than you.
Do you think we use that box enough as leaders?
Well, no. Personally speaking, I probably would have said no. I think that I learnt how to delegate, but
Well, that's the other
delegating,
thing is what skills do we need to use that box well?
yeah, exactly. And what often happens, I don't know if you found this, but delegating also requires the people in your team to have enough skills to be able to do that task. Often there's a tension, isn't there? It's a bit of a tug of war between knowing that you should delegate it, but actually then recognizing that it's going to take you longer to delegate than do the task yourself.
Yeah.
And you end up in that vicious cycle, don't you, of
So
never delegating because it's always going to take too long to actually explain it to somebody else.
and that's I mean, you literally I can hear the words of coachees, and I'm sure people listening can hear these words that they will have said, which is, "It's just quicker for me to do it myself." And that yes, it's quicker today for you to do it yourself,
Yeah.
but over the long term, creating and sustaining that habit of doing it yourself is not quicker at all, because you're not using that delegate box
Yeah.
when
Some
you could be.
Yeah. Some meetings might go into this box as
Mm.
well.
Yeah, yeah.
So how often do you hear somebody saying, I basically had back-to-back meetings? I had a coaching client last week who said she had had 9 meetings that day, including ours.
Just think of the mental load of switching between all of those different groups of people and different topics.
Yeah. She had 3 90-minute meetings, 3 60-minute meetings, and 3 half-hour meetings.
Sounds like my idea of hell. But yeah, some days are like that, aren't they?
And what she then recognized, so actually it wasn't the day that we were coaching, it was the previous day, because what she then recognized, she uses her walk home, or she has a commute that's bus
Mm.
and walk.
Mm.
And on the walking part of it, she uses that to actively reflect on the day. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, what a superpower.
Yeah.
And what she reflected on was that she'd had too many meetings. Didn't take much to establish that,
Mhm.
probably, but that one of those meetings in particular, she just had not been at all the engaged in the way that she wanted to be. She didn't feel that she'd added value. She didn't have the right attention. And she then did some stuff to follow up on what that meeting was. I think it was somebody in her team, to give them some extra, basically to give them a bit extra. She'd
Mhm.
followed up with them because she'd recognized that in that meeting she hadn't really been on form.
Yeah, that sounds great reflection.
Yeah. So, but I wonder sometimes, taking her day, those 9 meetings, number 1, did she have to be in all of those?
Mhm.
So that's a good question. And then number 2 is, maybe she does, but did she have to say yes to that particular day for all of those? Seeing all of those meetings cropping up in her calendar in just one day.
Can I share another beef then? That
Mm.
it's not always obvious that you can do this, you should do this, which is, I mean, I've asked people, how do you decide which meeting invites to accept?
Mm.
And sometimes I've heard the answer, well, I accept them all because that's my job. And the notion that actually you don't accept every meeting invite, there are criteria for you accepting a
Mm.
meeting invite, which is, can I see how this, moves forward something of strategic importance, so I can see where it sort of sits in terms of importance to the business? Can I see where I'm going to add some value to it? Or can I see where I'm going to get some value from it? And just clarity around what those things are, what's expected of me. Sometimes I'll only go to a meeting when you've explained what it is, what the agenda is going to be, and what the outcome is going to be. I mean, there's all sorts of things around, just because you put a calendar meeting in my diary, you're just taking an hour of my time, and all you said is catch up on project X. Well, how do I
Mm.
know that I'm going to add material value or get material value from that when, we just have a meeting acceptance bias, I think, and actually bringing some, I mean, you can almost apply this entire matrix to your meeting invites rather than
Absolutely. And
accept
you
them.
know what? It's just made me think about how maybe things have changed by virtue of the technology having changed, because there was a time when, in order to go a meeting, there had to be some sort of exchange of invitation that didn't involve plonking some time in somebody's calendar.
Mhm.
In other words, whether it was an email, whether it was a memo on a piece of paper that went into an envelope, or, however long you want to go back in work history, there would be a somewhat of an exchange of, I'd like you to come to this meeting, that may prompt you to go, why? What do you need from me? To actually have some of that thinking.
Yeah.
When now it is so easy to just book a meeting on Outlook or whatever, that just things just ping into your calendar. It takes away that conscious thinking.
Doesn't it? So there's a lot, I think there's a lot we could focus on in terms of, how do we spend our time, and meeting invites and notifications are huge in that. Uh,
Yes, and notifications, that sits in the bottom right box for me. The
yes.
bottom right box is not urgent, not important. Yes, we don't really know how urgent the thing is that is pinging up on our screen until we've read it. But by that time, it's too late because you've already given it your attention.
Yes.
So if it were so urgent that you were needed immediately, that person would find a different mechanism of contacting you.
Yes.
So if your child is sick and the school needs you urgently, they will call you, and
Mhm.
you will probably have that number on as your exceptions list if you're on a do not disturb, or you would have some mechanism of letting some of those really critical things
Mm.
through.
Mhm.
And everything else, like you said before, of course you would check your emails. Who could possibly go through a day and have forgotten to check I would
I bet
love
they're
to be that
calm.
person.
I bet they're a lovely, a calm, serene person who could just, not bother to check their emails all day.
I put them in the same category as the people who forget to eat, because
It would never happen with me.
it just wouldn't happen. So I mean, I just don't think it is physically possible these days for us
Mm.
to just forget to check our emails and all the other platforms we get messages through as well these days.
Yeah.
So notifications, trivia, low value add that we don't need to get. They go into the bottom right box of the Eisenhower matrix because they're not urgent and typically they're not important. So the sand that we
Yeah.
know, some of it does need to go into the jar, not
Yeah.
all of it needs to go in the jar.
We need to delete more, leave more things undone. That's basically what we're saying. We've got to be a bit judicious, but we need to focus on that.
So you were basically saying we need to do more of the delete.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
in readiness for your holiday, let's not forget you're going on holiday.
Darling.
Um, in readiness for your holiday, I expect you will have had to delete more things than normal. How did
Yes.
you find that?
Well, I think once I'd consciously decided that that was my approach for the week, I actually
Mm,
felt quite good about it. And I think that is almost where a big chunk of the value of this model lies. So even just deciding to use this model puts you into strategic thinking territory. The
yeah,
fact that I'm going to mindfully and purposefully plan out my time
yeah.
is the bit where the value lies, because then I've got a choice. I may actively decide to spend all my time reading notifications. I might, it's pretty unlikely if you actively decided, but you still got that choice.
Mm,
But if you don't actively, purposefully, intentionally decide, then you don't have a choice. You are pulled into your own bad habits and to other people's demands of you, into those tasks that are easy or knowable or you're comfortable with. You stay in your comfort zone. If you don't intentionally decide, I am going to plan my time this week and plan my thinking and plan my value this week in a different way, then you're just at the whim of whatever life throws at you. And I think in a way, so the model is really useful for all of those things and exploring all of those different areas we've gone through. But I think its main value is just deciding to use it and go, where is my value this week? Where does my head need to be? Where are those big things?
yeah.
It's just a powerful shift on the week. And that's what I've done this week. And therefore, ditching the things that are not mission critical has been a lot easier because I've actively decided that this is how I'm going to tackle it.
Okay. And therefore, you have spent enough time in the top right box, which
Uh-huh.
ironically, I mean, we we try to keep these episodes to half an hour. And what I'm just noticing is that we haven't actually spent any time on the top right box, which is the most important box and is the reason for using this matrix in the first place,
No.
because that is where you can spend quality time, quality thinking. You're working on things that have a strategic importance, but need a little bit of space, that
Yeah.
need that
Space.
need no notifications interrupting your train of thought, giving your brain every opportunity to start making those connections, thinking about a particular activity, thinking about the breadth of that activity and where else that might impact, tuning into why it's important, all the things that we've talked about in previous episodes about strategic thinking in its essence.
Mm-hmm.
How we're going to then start to navigate some of that strategic activity needs space.
It
And
does.
in order to give it space, you need to make sure that you're in that top right box.
And that's that state of flow that
Mm,
you may have come across. And it's getting into that state of flow, which is when this is the only thing I'm thinking about. And that really is where your very, very best work takes place,
yeah.
your most strategic work. I think of those days as half days in the diary. And when I look visually at my week on my
Mm,
calendar, I want to make sure I've got a couple of big chunks of those in the week. And then all my little busy little meetings, I want to have all of those together in a day or in a couple of half days. I have decided to focus on this thing and only this thing for this morning, and nothing else is
yeah.
going to affect it. And then other chunks of the week are my do chunks, which is I have got 3 or 4 meetings in that half day, but they're kind of all together.
And let's not kid ourselves. that our strategic thinking needs to happen in front of a laptop.
Oh, no.
So,
Point.
the client I mentioned earlier who does her reflection on the day on her walk home, part of her commute, that is a strategic walk. And I sometimes have used this before with clients, this idea of we don't get enough exercise, we don't get enough fresh air, or when you're working from home, you just feel like you're chained to your desk. And my husband calls my office the bunker.
You're locked in there. Yeah.
Yeah. But you could go for a walk. But if you give yourself the permission that not only is it good for your well-being and your mental health, and it's good to get some exercise and it's good to get some fresh air, but actually to couch it perhaps as a thinking walk. I'm going to just walk for however long you can give yourself permission to do, the longer the better in many ways, to just allow your mind to wander and allow some of that wider thinking, the space to actually start putting some of that activity in place. And so you can piggyback a couple of things, a couple of benefits of activities like that. And sometimes some people just need the permission to block time in their calendar for a thinking walk, that it's not just for a walk, it's for a thinking walk. And some clients have found that really helpful as a reframe.
That's a great reframe, isn't it? And that, that decide box is, well, where is the best place for you to do that? Where are you going to do that best deep work? Is it maybe at your desk? It may be, sometimes I sit on my floor with an A3 pad and a Sharpie and I scribble things.
Yeah.
And that's actually the best place for me to do the big thinking. And then absolutely go for a walk, let things settle.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely critical for staying in that fourth and most important box, the decide box.
Absolutely. So if you haven't done this for a while or ever, maybe now is the right time to just go for a little thinking walk or take yourself away to reflect on this for a bit. How would you plot that in this matrix? It's going to be in the show notes as well so that you can remind yourself of it. How would you put each of those activities in those boxes? What might you to change if you were being more intentional? And then what's coming up? How can you start planning next week where those activities are perhaps going to be in a better alignment so that you can create the space that is needed for strategic work and not sleepwalk or autopilot your way through the week, allowing all of that sand and the interruptions, the notifications, everything to literally soak up all of that time and give you no space for strategic work.
That sounds like a thoroughly sensible place to leave things for today. I feel really motivated to go, okay, what is most important in the few remaining hours before I go on holiday? Probably packing, to be honest, because I haven't started that. And which bits to just leave, which bits to say, no, they can wait, or they don't have to get done at all. That's quite liberating, really.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Fee.
Well, thank you, Jem. It's always a pleasure to talk through these things. I hope everybody listening has found something of value in the conversation we've just had.
And I think we all look forward to hearing about your holiday.
Oh, don't worry. I shall be banging on about it for quite some time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.